Greetings, diners, and welcome to another edition of the Collapse Cafe here on the Doomstead Diner. Today I'm joined by some of my regular friends from the Collapse blogosphere. Going from the right of your screen, I've got Gail Tverberg from Our Finite World here. She's a former actuary who's been concerned with the problems of resource depletion and our financial problems from her perspective as an actuary for many years. And then next to her, we have Tidos from the Pray for Calamity blog, who writes some fabulous material and from a very interesting perspective. He is currently living a more rural life, trying to simplify and make an off-the-grid lifestyle more possible, and talks about his experiences with that often on his blog. It's definitely worth visiting. Next to him is Steve Ludlam. Steve, also known as Steve from Virginia. Steve runs the blog Economic Undertow and is one of the more outside-the-box thinkers that I have run across in my excursions around the internet, and has come up with some very interesting economic perspectives over the years, and our discussions are always enlightening. So anyway, that's it for the introductions. Oh yes, and I'm Ari. I run the Doomstead Diner, and also our Sun for Living Sustaining Universal Needs Foundation. I'd like to invite people to visit that. We're getting more off the ground now. It's a nonprofit company, and we're trying to develop more sustainable methods of living, as the title might indicate. So visit the diner and visit Sun and find out more about that. Okay, before we get into our discussions on what's going on with the energy situation and economic situation with the stock market today, thought we'd cover what's in the news. And what's in the news is some big action on the weather front and up here on the geological front. We had a big earthquake last night, 7.1 on the Richter scale. Shook my place pretty good. It was first earthquake for me. That was big enough to get me jumping out of bed and running outside in my pajamas. It was a real shaker. But no damage to the building after the shaking was done. Just a few things fell off shelves and whatnot. So I had that little excitement. But Steve has had a little bit more excitement than that. He's down there in Washington, D.C. at ground zero for the snowstorm. So, Steve, you want to tell us a little bit about what's going on down there in D.C. with the snow?
Nothing's going on. Everybody's trying to dig out their cars. And we really got smashed. We got, depending on where you were, you can get as much as 3 feet of snow. And around here, I got about 24 inches. And, the usual drifts and blowing snow, whiteout conditions. So and it's all up and down the East Coast. It isn't just a D.C. metro area. It's Philadelphia, New York. They got hammered, too.
Yeah, well, that's one of the aspects of this is that sometimes when these snowstorms are localized, they can bring in crews and equipment from nearby cities and help out in the removal. But in this case, everybody's sort of got to fend for themselves. They can't get assistance from anybody else.
But you also don't have any transit. So people that depend on, they need to get somewhere in order to go somewhere else. They can't get to the first destination. So it cuts down on the amount of manpower that you would use to clear things out. So, of course, right now it's Sunday. It's a good day for everybody to kind of, sit back and relax and watch a football game. But, Monday it's going to be, there's a lot of stuff isn't going to be running. So it's going to be a big problem.
Yeah, well, one of the fortunate parts of this storm, as far as the economics go, is that it did hit on a Saturday, and so it does give the sanitation crews and the cleanup crews a full day to do some road clearing. But you know, it's going to take a while, I think, to get all of the roads sufficiently clear. New York, I believe, from the reports that I've read, is doing a little bit better on the clearing, but they get the big storms more regularly. They have more equipment for snow removal and so forth. So I'm not surprised that they're doing better than Washington.
Well, New York also has a subway, so most people go to work, travel around on the subway. So they shut the subway down on part of the day during the height of the storm. They ran it in the underground part, and I presume now they're cleaning up the elevated aspects, and it should be back to normal by tomorrow.
Yeah, I would expect they would have it back.
We're good at that sort of thing, but you get around here, the whole thing is shut down, and most of the subway cars are out in the open. They all have to be dug out by hand, and then because they didn't run anything during the storm, and the people that work for the metro, they've got to get to the metro in order to get the trains to run or do anything else, and the roads are still largely blocked. So it's a big fiasco. I mean, DC has the DC area has America's second largest subway system for ridership, and if that's not functioning, then it's just going to be a mess because the roads are not clear either. I mean, the interstates are somewhat clear, but it's not full capacity. So a lot of people are going to wind up staying home tomorrow and Tuesday.
Yeah, and there's also that last mile problem, I think, with the DC system, in that a lot of people that use it to commute actually have to drive to the light rail station.
Right.
So
right.
they've
Or they ride a bus. Like, I don't have a car, so I use a bus to get to the subway, and what we call it a metro. And the buses aren't running now, and they may run tomorrow, but they're not going to be running a full schedule. So it's a long haul to get from where I am to the metro, and it's a lot harder when you don't have any sidewalks. And I'm sure everything's going to be jam-packed with automobiles tomorrow, so it'd be almost too dangerous to go outside. So it is, it's a costly. And the thing that's interesting about it, there's two things that kind of strike me. One is, they predicted the storm in advance, and they did it pretty much to a very fine degree. And I was impressed by that. They did the same thing with Hurricane Sandy. They had this one almost a week in advance. And some of the models were starting to show a storm like 10 days in the past. So that's impressive. And they're able to pick up the business of, upper air, what was going to happen in the upper atmosphere. It was something they couldn't do, 15 years ago. So
that's the supercomputers at work there. Just the computational power now that's out there to run those models just really didn't exist 15 years ago. So and they refine the models as time goes by. So prediction is getting a lot better, and that does cut down on loss of life and a lot of other things when people have that opportunity to prepare. So that is a good thing that has gone on out there. The thing that I was surprised with this storm, because it had such high winds, I expected more power outage, but there didn't. The power outage only seemed to really hit North and South Carolina. I read about 100,000.
Well, they had ice down there. That was the difference there. The high winds, the real high winds, were near the coast. So you get inland, like where we go. It was breezy, but it wasn't bad enough. The snow was light, so it didn't accumulate on the wires or break branches down or anything like that. In fact, most of the trees don't have snow on them. The wind blew the snow instead of letting it pile up.
Mm-hmm. So, Gail, you're down on the East Coast. Anything happening in your neighborhood?
Well, I think the one thing that happened in our neighborhood is that they closed practically everything down on Friday here. So we ended up with people staying home from work or working from home. So I think a lot of people lost a day of work, even though we really weren't hit by the storm very much, certainly not during the day on Friday. In fact, they probably could have gotten home on the bus that evening if everything had run as normal.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's goes on the better safe than sorry aspect of it, which you can understand. But the economic effects of these things can be quite intense. I read in another article that they're estimating perhaps $1 billion or a couple of $1 billion in between cleanup and lost revenue and all the rest of those things, and that does tend to hit the working man the most, the wage earner, who gets paid by the hour, rather than a salaried position or whatever, or you can work from home, etc. For I'd say the majority of the population, if you don't go to work, if your work is canceled for the day, you don't get paid. And with a lot of people living paycheck to paycheck, that means that they're that much more in the hole for that month, and the bills start to back up. T-Dos, any outcomes for you in your area of the country?
No, power outages and road blockages are fairly par for the course in the winter time. It doesn't take much because we live in such a densely forested area. I mean, every power line's got 50 trees hanging over it, and we're in a very hilly condition, a lot of gravel roads, in a county that doesn't have a ton of money, so they plow the highways first, and when I say plow, I mean they set it an inch or two above the streets. They don't want to rip up the streets, and then they have to fix it. So you get a nice glazy coating. But this time around, we got like 3 or 4 inches of snow. It wasn't a big deal. I keep a chainsaw on the back of a Jeep, so if you're driving and you see a tree, you can get it out of the way. That is a regular occurrence in the winter, even the summer with thunderstorms and such. Some power outages around here, but again, it's pretty normal.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've actually had the exact opposite problem up here in Alaska, and that's one of the really interesting aspects of this whole climate change business. We have had a extreme lack of snow for the second year in a row up here, and currently, well into January, the ground is bare, even out in the bush, at least at this elevation, and so this disturbs a lot of the people here who make their living plowing snow and whatnot. A lot of people, fishermen who work during the summers doing commercial fishing, try to make a living by plowing snow in the wintertime. They're hurt by this. And then we have our yearly race, the Iditarod, the dog sled race that goes up to Nome, commemoration of Race for Mercy that occurred back in 1925. When they had to get diphtheria serum up there. And the only way to do it was by dog sled in those days. They didn't have all the light planes that they have in our current era and so forth. And of course, Alaska still has virtually no road system besides the corridor that goes from Seward through Anchorage and on up to Fairbanks. The rest of the country, the rest of the state is pretty much without roads. And so you just can't get there. Anyway, by plane, anywhere but by plane or by dog sled or snow machine, as long as the fuel is available. So those are some of the weather occurrences that are going on now. We don't know precisely what the causes are for all of them. There's much in the way of debate and discussion on that, but that is not our topic for today. Our topic is disruptions on other areas that concern us. And in particular, I'd say I think we can start with the continuing slide in oil prices that began when Steve predicted it in November, December of 2014 with the Triangle of Doom, and has gone considerably down from there to depths that I don't think anybody a few months ago thought were even possible. Numbers are even lower than the crash in 2008, 2009, where it dropped down below the $30 handle. So I'll start with Gail on this one. Gail, you want to talk about what's going on with oil prices? You've had a couple of blogs recently on that?
Yes, I think it's a very serious situation with these low oil prices. I think what's happening is, we had the low oil prices of 2008, 2009, and we instituted quantitative easing. There was a whole lot of stimulus to the economy done, and all kinds of things done to kind of push the economy along. And what's happening now is that that stimulus is wearing out. We're not doing as much of it, and we're coming back to the same low oil prices we had before. I think the prices started falling in the middle of the year in July. Not very fast, and they got faster as the year went on. So we've had closer to 18 months of it, but it's been a period. It was really 2011 it hit the peak, and then it kind of gradually came down a little bit, and then it has come down much more at the end, and we've seen it on a lot of other commodities. It's serious for a lot of reasons. It's going to lead to a lot of bankruptcies, and I don't see a good way to get ourselves out of it.
Well, the bankruptcy aspect of it is one of the most curious ones. With given the speed at which it has declined, and the fact that so many of the companies that got into the extraction biz are leveraged up to beat the band, it's hard for me to see how come really relatively few of them have gone bankrupt to date. There have been a few of the smaller ones, and the smaller fish always go first, of course. But I would have thought that the fallout would have started coming a lot quicker than it has. Steve, you got any thoughts on why we are not seeing the bankruptcies accelerate up that quickly right as of yet?
Well, they're going pretty fast. I mean, it's not like a crash, but companies can still borrow. At least some of them can, and the majors can still produce, and the majors and the national oil companies are still producing the bulk of the oil. So you talk about the bankruptcies; it's really a small part of a small part. So you're dealing with frackers, some of your offshore producers, countries that are in severe decline, like United Kingdom has a big problem because their oil fields are all like 40 years old. And they're in steep decline, so it costs a lot to keep them going to get anything out of them. And they're also offshore. The onshore well can turn into a stripper well when it gets down to say 10 barrels a day. But you got an oil platform, it gets below a certain amount, it might be 1,000 barrels a day. You got to shut the platform down deep, plug the well. So but this is where right now this is where your bankruptcy problem is. And but it's starting to leak out from the center. So you have countries with real problems, like Saudi Arabia and Iran have problems. So does Russia. Real problems. Venezuela is almost bankrupt. That's been an oil producer, since the 30s. And then, everywhere there's an oil industry, there's, they're hurting because they've lost, 70% of their revenue. So, some of the countries like Norway and Saudi Arabia have reserves, but reserves don't last forever. You're trying to defend your currency, you're going to burn through them very rapidly. So, that's what's happening in places like Russia and Saudi Arabia. They're burning through their reserves as fast as they can because they've got some other economic reason to maintain, either dollar real price parity or dollar ruble. They don't want the currency to go in the trash. So that, so I think we're not seeing a crash, level of bankruptcy, but it's really there. It's just behind the surface. And it's going to accelerate, or maybe not. It doesn't really matter. Sooner or later, all of these oil producers are going to have severe financial problems. It's just the nature of the game. Its depletion is catching up.
Well, yeah, and the case as usual is that the very biggest ones maintain their access to credit because they are, in many respects, affiliated with the big banks that are able to issue out the credit. And for the banks to let them go bankrupt, will bankrupt the bank, right? So they'll roll over loans that they wouldn't for smaller companies that won't bankrupt them, but for the biggest companies, they'll roll these loans over because they just can't let them go bankrupt.
Well, the banks have a lot of tools that they're not going to talk about. They can hedge their position. They can use the different markets, and they can use derivatives to hedge against losses and against their debtors. They can hedge against that. They can also facilitate mergers and acquisitions. I mean, there's a lot of people are sitting on the sidelines, these kind of finance type, and say, well, we got a whole long list of companies here that have different kinds of resources in the ground, and we'll buy them 10 cents on the dollar when they go through bankruptcy. So, it's the 10 cents versus the dollar. That's where the real loss is, and the banks are masters at hiving those losses on to taxpayers. They'll shift the assets over to the central bank. They do all these kind of shenanigans so that they don't have to face the music. And it's that's one of the reasons, that and the hedges, the price hedges, are what's keeping some of these establishments, basically the establishment as a whole, afloat. And the other thing that's happening is, you got the drillers. Once they drill the well, that's their big expense. Getting the well, getting to where oil comes squirting out of it. Okay, that's where your big costs are, right up front. So once you've got that cost, you can get the oil out of the ground at a fairly low marginal cost. So if they got a well that's choked, then they'll take the choke off and they'll let the oil come out, and they'll sell it for whatever they can get. Because it's going to cost. They'll sell it for less maybe a year from now. They just get it now. So that's one reason why you're having a big flood of oil out of these wells. Because it's a Katie bar the door. We're going to pump as much as we can, and we'll pump more tomorrow if we can.
Right.
We already spent the money on the well. We need to get that money back.
Well, from the other side of the coin, while the producers are taking it in the shorts, you've got the consuming end of the society, and looking at this as, wow, those low prices, those are just great. Martin, you got any thoughts about low prices every day for gasoline in your neighborhood?
I mean, I can't see anyone who's, struggling to put food on the table complaining that, a resource that they require is, dropped almost, over the past few years by about 50%. I mean, I remember, it must have only been last year looking at gas, gas pumps that said, $3 a gallon, and now it's $1.50. So I can't imagine anyone who, requires that to keep the family fed or keep the lights on is going to, on its face, do anything but celebrate it. I thought people are particularly, maybe not all of them, but many people are savvy enough to understand that there are knock-on effects of this. But when I think people on sort of lower end of the spectrum see the prices for gasoline kind of shoot through the roof, they feel like they're getting screwed. They feel like somewhere up the line, some corporate fat cat, some guys, millionaires somewhere, are just really grinding us down on the bottom. And then so when the prices drop, so quickly, I think they try to take it, and on the exact opposite side of the coin there, where they're like, well, great, now it's our turn. You guys were railing on for so long, and now we're going to get ours. But again, I think they're also smart enough to understand that it won't last forever, that it's probably a temporary blip, and that it will be a negative spread that comes from such low prices out in the greater end of society. I don't know if I've read too definitive of account of the exact sort of reasons. I feel like everyone feels a little wishy-washy on reasons for the price bouncing, the price dropping. There's talk of just a general deflation taking hold due to global net energy on the decline, or just bubble economy in China crashing, killing demand. There's the whole thing. People are saying Saudi Arabia is trying to kill the United States fracking industry, and I feel that, I don't know, there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of theory on that. How long it's going to last? How long we're gonna see this before there's a spike again? And then the other day I was reading on resilience. There was an article about whether or not sort of the entire boom since like 2005 has been primarily in least condensate, and whether or not a lot of these reserves that are getting piled up are at what level they are crude oil. I will say on a personal note, as someone who has taken who's been a big enemy of tar sand oil, I'm happy to see tar sand selling at something like $8.50 a barrel. And see TransCanada is trying to sue the United States government now for like $15 billion in lost revenues. The timing on that's pretty hilarious. Watching as the value of the resource they're trying to move is just gone right through the floor, and they see an easy way to make up for dollars spent, just sue the U.S. government. But, yeah.
Well, that aspect of it, it depends on your economy. If your local economy, the working man doesn't depend on oil-related jobs of some type. The economy is based on something else, whatever it might be, that is not too directly related to oil, and they're not being laid off and so forth. Everybody feels good about it. Hey, cheap price is great, right? My dollar goes further. I have money left over to spend on other things. And then the economistas tell us that, oh, well, we're going to get a GDP boost from this because everybody's going to have more money to spend on Chinese toys at Walmart. But in fact, we don't really necessarily see that additional expenditure going out into the economy. Well, let me go to Gail on this, Steve. Hold your thought. Gail, what do you think about the way the price structure is affecting both the wages versus the cost of goods and services? How does that balance work itself out?
Well, I think part of what happens when the price goes down, the consumer is the last to get the benefit. The governments will step in and say, oh, this is a great time to raise taxes a little bit. Or I know the government of China says, well, we don't really think that the consumer should have the benefit of the low price of oil in China, gasoline, so we're not going to reduce the gasoline prices even though the price goes below $40 a barrel. So, the part of it is that the governments don't pass on the low price to the individual, and also the businesses take their share and more than their share as profits. So, you're going to see wider margins, say, on refining. You're going to see different pieces. The airline industry suddenly does better. The other industries do better before they go certainly raising wages or hiring new workers. And the ones that do hire new workers tend to be something like restaurants or something that you can add a few workers easily without making a big cash investment, putting up a big factory that would take a couple years, because by the time you get your factory put in place, there's a good chance that the price will be back up again. So all you get is just some kind of temporary little things that people can put in place quickly, mostly a few service jobs.
Yeah, and what jobs are being created are pretty much, I think, in the service industry, although it's hard to see what those are, because we see the fact that a lot of the retail outlets are closing down, so that means you need less retail store clerks. You have the automation aspect of it, and brick and mortar stores disappearing in favor of places like Amazon, which means that is again less staff that needs to be hired in. So I'm hard pressed to see exactly where the increased jobs are, even low-paid jobs in this economy. Just really hard to figure out where that comes from. Then we talk about this bouncing up and down business of the prices, and really the price could only go back up when some type of shortage shows itself up. And this a perceived glut that we have which, it is a glut because storage facilities are, pretty much at capacity in most places. So really the price will only come back up, in my opinion, when that glut starts to disappear. Steve, do you got any thoughts? Can you make a prediction? You could pull this one off.
You've got two groups.
When we're going to start to see the oil inventories start to drop.
It's not working the way that the old models of supply and demand are working to say it's supposed to work. And it's nothing wrong with supply and demand. It's the only way prices can go up is if the customers, the people that are the end users who buy petroleum products, get more money. And right now they're broke. Everybody in the world right now, except for a handful of billionaires, is broke. So they can't afford the high price. So when the price goes up, in other words, if the drillers get more money and they say, well, we borrowed another $100 billion and we're going to use it to do blah, blah, blah. Well, the drillers rely on the same broke customers to retire the drillers' loans. And they can't do it because they're bankrupt. And it's not just in the United States. I mean, there's places in the United States where people have money. They say, well, I can buy the cheap gas. I'll drive around. I'll put it in my snowmobile, my ATV, my Harley Davidson, everything else. But it's a global economy. There's people who use automobiles and motor vehicles and engine-powered things around the world, and they're not buying as much, and they're not spending the money because they don't have the money. Now, when they say have the money, how do you get the money? It's like, well, I have a job. I earn the money. All right, you're working for a company, and what that company does is it borrows from the company's customers, and it borrows from the company's customers' banks. In fact, it may have a daisy chain of these kind of lending arrangements, maybe to 6th or 8th or 20th degree. And that's what makes up our economy, daisy chains of loans where people's earnings are really borrowed from somebody else, some third party, some fourth party, or maybe by way of the government. But it's all loans. And what's happening is the credit system is breaking down. There's no repayment anywhere. There's no real earnings anywhere. There's just more and more loans. And the vast amount, the tremendous overhang of debt that every single economy on planet Earth right now, we're at the point where you can't expand the borrowing capacity by expanding the amount of loans. So what this means is the customers, the people at the bottom of the economic food chain are being left out. And as they're being left out, they're not buying fuel. And as they're not buying fuel, the prices collapse. And it's going to stay collapsed because there's no way you can get these people more buying power. And when they don't have any buying power, that's it for them. It's curtains. And if you have a shortage, that isn't going to give them more buying power. Nobody gets rich by a shortage. It isn't going to make anybody wealthier. It's just going to make things worse. It feeds on itself in a vicious cycle. And this is the part that people aren't getting. It's like it feeds on itself. The more stimulus you have, the more QE you have, the more negative your interest rate goes, the more straitened the customer becomes, and the farther the oil prices crash. And it's like you have QE in Europe, QE in Japan. We just had years of QE in the United States. You got monetary stimulus, all these other economies trying to bail themselves out. And all it does is it strips credit from the customer and gives it back to finance and gives it to these tycoons. And they don't need the money. And, they're going to keep repeating the same mistake over and over again until the oil price goes down to zero. That's basically where it's going to wind up. I mean, they're bound and determined. The system is bound and determined to get the oil price down to zero. And I can tell you right now, at $2 or $3 oil, you do not have an oil industry at all. It's gone.
Well, not if they keep issuing loans to the oil industry.
Well, who's going to pay off the loans to the oil industry? Somebody has to pay off those loans, then you get into the bankruptcy.
More money to pay off the last loan. That's been the ticket for a long time, Steve.
Look, what we got right now is the appearance of a glut because there's too much oil in the system. It's because you have a big expansion in the amount of credit going to the drillers relative to the credit going to the customer.
Right, so the question is, when do they stop issuing credit to the drillers so that more of them go out of biz, less oil comes out of the ground, and then the oil quantity starts to drop?
All right, I'm going to say two things, then we'll pass on to somebody else. Two things. One is if they give more money to the drillers, then drillers are going to produce more oil. You're going to have more of a glut. If you don't produce money to the drillers, then there's going to be a shortage. So it's like either way you go, it's like the devil in the deep blue sea. It's bad news either way. Either you have too much credit and an oversupply, or not enough credit and they all go bankrupt.
Yeah, well, you would think they could maybe triage it off to get it just right, right?
But you can't, man, you can't. It's impossible.
Yeah, well, it does appear to be the case. It also, the oil situation and the dropping prices in the oil situation is finally apparently having some effect on the magically levitated stock market, which has gone up to dizzying heights through the years of QE, and now appears to be finally coming back to earth. And much of the world's stock markets are now in a bear market, 20% decline, and some, like Saudi Arabia's market, has actually seen a 50% loss of value. And I think I read that something like $15 trillion in notional wealth has been vaporized in what I like to call the greatest bonfire of paper wealth in all of recorded history. Over these last few weeks, the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks or so, has seen stock market declines zipping down there like Peekaboo Street on a downhill run. Gail, what are your thoughts on stock market and where how that's going to affect the overall economy here as we move along?
Well, I think we've got all these pieces working together. It's not just the oil prices, it's the coal prices, it's the natural gas prices, it's the metal prices. So we've got a lot of different kinds of things and the earnings are very poor of all these companies. The bank earnings are also very poor. This is something that people don't think about. And the fact that the banks are doing poor, and now with Basel III regulations, they have more requirements for capital, which means it makes it harder for them to lend. So what happens is that you're not getting as much loans out of the banks, or it doesn't push the economy along the way it should be pushing the economy along. So the regulations that were added in the last couple of years, while it may protect individual banks from going bankrupt, doesn't really add to the ability of the banks to issue more and more silly loans for silly purposes. So it cuts us back that direction.
Well, the silly purposes aspect of it is one of the more interesting aspects of how the market's been bubbled up to begin with. I mean, with incredibly silly investments that like facepalm, as I like to call it, Facebook, and these internet startup companies that are just getting multi-billion-dollar IPOs, and Wall Street shovels the money that they borrow from the Fed at these investments. That's how they try to get their yield on all of this borrowed money. And so the prices on those things get inflated all out of proportion, and eventually that has to come down to earth. But so the nature of the beast there is that they either don't believe it or they force it in some way. And we have the famed plunge protection team of the Fed that artificially inflates the prices themselves in one way or another. Marty, do you got any thoughts on stock markets and it's the general wealth, so-called wealth effect that comes out of that, and how that affects our society in general?
I've never owned a stock in my life. I wouldn't know how to buy one if I wanted one. I don't know people who own stock, so when stock markets go up and down, it's just a thing that happens somewhere else. It's strange because there's when you are a person who goes on the internet and looks at Reddit subs or doom blogs and is trying to track sort of the decline of industrial civilization, one of the things you will often find discussion of are things like stock markets. and there's this whole group of people out there who that just has nothing to do with. And it's like, I'm far more terrified and like decline in like fish stocks, or like, what's the fish stock in the ocean or in the local river, or what's the stock of timber outside the window, it's I've been hanging out and reading about peak oil and all the things for 12 years now, since I was pretty young, since I was in my young 20s, and so I was there at 2008 when the stock market all started falling apart, and people were like, "We lost all our money," and I was like, "I never had any," and no one I know ever did. So it's sort of imaginary in two regards. Like the people who have billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars, you say they're trying to find a spot to park their money to make money, right? They're trying to find that yield. You're making fun of the tech IPOs that are, six guys in a room and they're worth $1 billion to make no product, I think that just shows the desperation of trying to get something for nothing on the part of billionaires who already have everything. They must have more. And it's like, it's imaginary in that sense. You said 15 trillion gone. It's like it was never there. It wasn't a thing. It was numbers somewhere. And what were those good for? Well, they could borrow more numbers against those numbers, and now those numbers are gone. But for, I would say, the majority of the global population, because I'm only poor by American standards. There are people out there who are poor by like actual standards, and they're just looking. They have to pay money and to find a spot to sleep, and well, actually, all kind of do, but I mean, they do it nightly. But anyway, so it's one of those things I don't really track too hard. I mean, I guess I watch and I wait for, I don't know, what's going to happen. Is there going to be a day when they don't take dollars at grocery stores? Is there going to be a day when the guy who, how you're saying it's a daisy chain of a daisy chain of a daisy chain of loans, like at the end of it, every time? A bank. And so, like, the farmer who's growing the food that everyone eats still needs to pay the loan on his land and for his house. And so as long as the banks print dollars and then demand to receive them, the world will turn. I don't know.
Well, that's there's the question that you got. You have to look back to the Great Depression, to get some idea of what occurs. And although the general individual, most individuals do not own stocks, so a few may own them sort of by proxy out of their pension plans from wherever they worked, and then there's some pension fund manager somewhere who's investing it for him, if you will. But it doesn't seem to affect the individual directly, and so you don't see this connection. But what happened back in 1929 when they had their big crash is first you get the stock market crash, and then because the banks are so invested in those stocks, if the bank becomes too exposed, then you get the bank failures. And then that cascade started a couple of years later with the failure of a bank called Creditanstalt. It was a Rothschild bank. And then after that bank failed, then you started to have cascade failures through the entire banking system of the era, starting through Europe and then progressing through the whole American banking system. There was, of course, cross-contagion in those days, too. And then once that happened, money went out of circulation.
Though. At least right now, there's a big difference, which is like what didn't exist then as far as the printing power of the United States government. The petrodollar wasn't a thing, and now it is a thing. And it's a lie piece that's been set up by globalists who have a bunch of guns pointed at the rest of the world saying, you will listen while we do this, and we're going to write checks, and you're going to hold them, and you're never going to cash them, and then we're going to write some more, and you're going to hold those, and you're never going to cash them, and the stuff's going to keep coming in. Like, that system has to currently break, I think, in order for, like, because what we're worried about, like, the stock market's going to go down, and all of a sudden the stores are going to be closed, and we're going to be out of a job. If you're worried about that Great Depression style knock-on effect, like, you're basically saying, okay, and then also the entire banking apparatus has to have no tricks left up its sleeve. But as long as it can just generate that and flood it out whatever way it does, whether it's by buying bad assets and like this between the sheets swapping of good and bad assets. Like, they write the rules. It's an imaginary system. It's made up, and they write the rules, and the rules are enforced by guns. So at some level, that has to break too. I mean, I'm not saying we're not going to watch people get poorer. Poor are always going to get poorer and poorer and poorer. That's capitalism. That's how capitalism works. Yeah.
Oh, well, Steve, I know you have a lot of thoughts on that subject, so I'm going to let you rant some on how plausible it is for the government to just sort of keep printing money and keep pushing it out one way or the other. Where's the collateral, right? I know that's a big part of it. So, Steve, you want to give us your opinions on what the plausibility of maintaining the system?
Actually, Ari, what I want to do is talk about the snowstorm, because the snowstorm is like a perfect analog for what's going on right now. You just
take it away. Take it away. If you can make an analogy with the snowstorm, that sounds great.
Snowstorm is perfect because it was like this big giant blob of white stuff that just dropped on everybody, and there wasn't anything the bosses could do about it. So you got the politicians, and you got the business leaders, and you've got all of the economists and everybody else. I mean, I'm sure they got all kinds of tools and programs and policies. There ain't a damn thing any of them can do about the snow. Right? They're stuck in their little, crappy $5 million apartments, and they're trapped inside and they can't get out because they can't get a taxi or a limousine. So, I mean, the government, all these very powerful people can do a lot of stuff, but there's a limit. And you get into the real world, the real world says, well, this and no more. We're going to bury you with something. It's either going to be a big wad of white stuff, or it's going to be your credit isn't going to be any good. You're going to be, you're going to become ridiculous and irrelevant, and nobody's going to pay attention to you. This doesn't all have to happen at once. Snow all happened in a period of 24 hours. Things like losing credibility and predictability of the complex system. It's something that takes place over a long period of time. I think an argument can be made that the system started losing credibility after World War II. And, you had a lot of, just foolishness. And maybe going back farther than that. I mean, it's like, the banks have had their fingers in all these different pies. They're just making a big mess, and, people get rich. But what does that really mean? In the end, even the richest guy dies. So you got these are built-in limits. We live in a physical structure. We live in a biological structure. We live in a system that's based on everybody understanding that everybody's more or less got a fair shot. And of course that's a lie. So all these things become revealed to us that what the powers of the bosses tends to slip away. And once the bosses are revealed to be powerless, that people say, well, I'm not going to play by their rules. I'm going to do something different. In the Depression, you had people saying, well, I'm not going to spend my money. I'm going to use my money. I may need it for some time in the future. I'm hungry now, but I'm not going to spend the money. I'll be hungrier tomorrow, but I can deal with it. And, by not spending the money, basically what they did is they destroyed American capitalism. They brought it almost to its knees, and the only rescue for it was Adolf Hitler. So, the same sort of thing can happen again. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's going to happen again. You get to the point where people say, well, I'm going to save the last dollar because it means a tank full of gasoline, and I'm not going to spend it. And, once you have the relationship between gasoline and dollar, then that becomes fixed. If the dollar becomes a collectible, people say, I'm going to hold on to it, I'm not going to spend it. And, of course, when you don't have that flow of money back to the bosses or back to the banks, then the whole system falls apart. So, we're just getting started with this. We're at the beginning. We're kind of like, it's like the opera. This is the overture. We get a little overture here. We're going to see what happens next. Of course, it's going to be hard to see because the bosses are all going to deny everything. They're going to lie through their teeth. And but I think there's a lot of people that are going to kind of figure it out and say, well, you've had your chance, you've had your moment in the sun, and now it's our turn. We're going to screw you over.
Well, there's a big question on, which came first, the chicken or the egg? on this the paradox of thrift sort of situation, saving the money. I feel like it's more what Gail said earlier, which is that it's not that the people are choosing to save the money; it's that they don't have the money to spend at all. You don't have people with big savings accounts. Most people, 50% of the population, has less than a month's worth of savings in the bank. They don't have money to save. So it's not that they're taking the money out of circulation that way. The money's coming out of circulation because they're not getting jobs so that they can have money to save. So you've got to keep that flow coming out. It's got to come out of the spigot at some point to fill up the bathtub, and it's not coming out of the spigot. So, Gail, you got any thoughts on how money might be re-injected instead of at the top end of the society, getting it to flow to the bottom end of the society so that you can get this kind of flow going through the system so that people actually have money to spend?
Well, I think we have a problem here.
Gail, before you go on, you've got the way your camera is positioned, the light is coming right across the camera, and so you have a bad glare problem.
Let's see if I
You cut the shade down, you'll probably be able to.
Does that do it? Does that fix it?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, the light was shining in there. Anyhow. Well, the problem is that you need to, that the economy as a whole is not really producing enough goods and services, and the wages reflect this. And we end up, now we've got so many retired people, we've got so many people who are in school for years and years and years, that they really don't have the funds to buy things. And at the same time, they're getting tapped out on the amount of debt that they can afford. So what we're seeing is that it's not just oil prices that are low, it's everything that's low. It's coal prices, it's natural gas prices, it's metal prices, and it's the earnings of the banks that are just terrible, and the pension plans, they're doing just terribly. So we have everybody doing badly. So it's hard, you could say, okay, we're going to give more money to the workers. Well, maybe, but you somehow need to get more money to the banks and more money to the pension plans so they don't collapse. So it's a tricky situation. I mean, you can theoretically do QE and send checks out to each household, but I don't think you would have to be doing this on a monthly basis somehow or other. And you really need to have the whole system work together. It's not going to happen in every country in the world that there's going to be QE getting it down to everybody that doesn't have jobs or isn't well paid.
Well, that's been an idea that's been floated around quite a bit lately, is the basic income idea of getting rid of welfare, getting rid of all the Social Security benefits, getting rid of all of that stuff, and simplifying the whole business and just passing out a basic income to everybody, regardless of what their employment status is and so forth, so that everybody has free money to spend, essentially. Steve, I know you've got some thoughts on the basic income idea. What do you think of the plausibility of that, and will it ever even be undertaken? I find it impossible to believe that the government will ever start passing out free money to Joe Sixpack like they pass out free money to Pigment. There's a dual standard there. It's welfare for the rich and starvation for the poor. So anyway, Steve, you got some ideas on basic income?
Well, the Finns want to try it, and the Swiss want to try it. Well, these are both very small countries. They're fairly homogeneous, so you're not going to have the political nonsense. But there's other economists, in England and EU, and I think it's not a good, it's fair, and at the same time it would, cut back on some of the management expenses. So there's something in it for everybody. I like the idea because you could, say, look, we'll give you basic income. We'll give you more basic income if you don't own an automobile. We'll give you more if you don't have any children. So, we can make adjustments. So, if you have like a small family, you'll get some basic income. If you have no family, you get a lot more. So basically you're paying people to conserve. So it's more like a business deal. It's not like a welfare. They're not really thinking of it in those terms. They're thinking more in terms of, on one side of the political spectrum, it's like you're eliminating administrative costs, all the nonsense that goes along with the, safety net programs. It's the administrative costs are almost as high as the programs themselves. On the other side of the spectrum, they say, well, it's a way to, it's a direct way to end poverty. You just give people money, let them figure out what to do with it. So, we'll see. I mean, I like the idea, but I think it should be tied in with conservation. We're going to have conservation whether we like it or not. This would be a good tool.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the idea of paying people more money not to have children rather than what is the current situation, which is the more kids you have, the more welfare you can get for each kid. That would incentivize people to reduce population, which of course is one of the essentials. But then you have the demographic problem that you get as well when you.
They don't have a demographic problem. I mean, the only people that see a demographic problem are economists. And economists are wrong about just about everything. They're wrong about
the demographic problem in China, where with the years of one-child policy, I mean, their population has aged up more rapidly than just about anybody else, and they've got a huge overhang of old people.
Look, Ari, the whole idea about a big population makes sense, back in the biblical times when there was only a small number, relatively small number of humans. And, now there's like 7 billion, going on 7.5 billion. I mean, there is no shortage of human beings. In fact, we're overpopulated probably by 3 orders of magnitude.
Yeah, well, my feeling on that, though, is that rather than reducing the birth rate, where all the young people, you're not getting more young people into the system, we need to increase the death rate. Okay? I will, bring
you,
the population better, and we'll have...
You're trying to grease the waves. That's what you're trying to do, Ari. Most people, they deal with population control. It's very coercive.
You don't want old, feeble people that you got to, and everybody else. Right?
You can be a rich capitalist.
Quit rushing us, man. Quit rushing us. We're all going to make it there one way or the other. So that's not a problem. It's the birth rate that's the problem. And, instead of like cracking down on people, giving them punishment, we're like a bunch of punishment fags. All we want to do is beat people up and kill them. And it's like, if you want somebody to do something for you, pay them. You want somebody not to have a child, then pay that person not to have a child. As far as it goes, they can create more money. Now, the bank just has to write a little entry into a spreadsheet, okay? So you make the money and you give it to somebody and say, look, we'll give you, whatever, basic income, whatever you want to call it, just don't have a child this year. If you want to have a child next year, you'll have some money saved. You'll have the means to be able to take care of a child. It won't be a dependency on the system. So, but you've got to get a hold on the birth rate, particularly some of these places like in Africa and the Middle East where the birth rate is out of control. These people are going to die horrible deaths, from famines. And,
that does seem to be the way things are going, unfortunately. And
it's all your fault, Ari. You want to kill us all.
Yeah, well, I just want to solve the problem.
If I could say something about the basic income real quick.
Sure.
It's interesting because it acknowledges something most people on a base level don't acknowledge, which is that money is more than just reward for work done. So the general public has been trained to think that that's what money is. It's reward for work done. So especially in a more conservative viewpoint, that's why when someone says, hey, we should give someone health care, we should give them food or housing, more conservative viewpoint is going to say, no, don't give them that. You can't just give them money. They didn't earn it. They didn't go to work. If you just give it to them, they won't work. So it's when you have, but then what happens when, we keep seeing all the money go to 65 people on Earth and everyone else is poor, is that things just stop happening, right? Because there's no money to spend. So now we're sitting here puzzling over how do we give money back to the people on the bottom. So it acknowledges certain premises that, like, money has several functions, that if we only focus on one and not all several, you're not going to have a very functioning economic system. It also kind of highlights the premise that capitalism funnels money to a handful of people while leaving the rest fairly destitute, and that is a system with a very short shelf life. But then the counter problem that I see is that we're also we're talking about having functional economies on one side, and then we're talking about trying to save life on Earth in the other. And those two things don't really go together in a conventional sense. In the way that, like, what do we see when people have money and start spending money and have jobs and go and start companies? What they do, they harvest materials out of the natural world, turn them into products so they can be consumed, so they can be thrown onto a trash can, and we can build up landfills and fill the atmosphere with toxic chemicals and fill our blood with toxic chemicals. So we have to, it's like, well, I mean, I named my blog Pray for Calamity for a reason. I mean, we haven't been very good at coming up with conscious solutions by which we could organize ourselves in a way where we can have all these products and modern industrial lifestyles and not also destroy the ground on which we stand, which is going to lead to, like, our general demise in short, whether in short order or at least short order geologically. So part of me wants to say yes, it makes absolute sense, at least in the economic sense. If our primary goal is functioning economics, well, of course, money is a lubricant for society to make things happen. It is the power to buy the energy and labor of another person. It's saying, hi, go get this thing for me. Make me a meal. Fix my car. And if all the little people don't have that power over other people, we can't get things done amongst ourselves. But the more we do that, the more we also send a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere, and that's more trips to Red Lobster to eat up all the fish that have been trawled off the bottom. So what is our goal? Is our goal a livable planet? And what do we mean by that? What are those conditions? Or is our goal more of what we're doing? Is our goal like we just really like sofas and football on Sundays and cheeseburgers? We want to make sure everyone can have them.
Well, goals and how, directions, you have people at the top who pick the directions for society, the way money gets spent and so forth. And really, our whole industrial culture and our whole setup of ring roads and all the rest of that, this all came about, from the robber baron era and Standard Oil. They needed to find a way to make the oil valuable and to burn it, so burning it and making everybody dependent on it was the way to do that. And so, eventually the cars developed because they were a good way to get people burning oil, and people then became dependent on it. All right, I'm going to go through everybody now for a little bit of a closing statement, closing thoughts for the day. You can pick any of the topics that we talked about. Maybe in the I always like to go out with a little bit of prognostication on where we're going from here. So I will start this way. I will go the other way this time and start with Steve. Steve, you got any closing thoughts on oil and the economy and what we're going to be seeing from as we move down the pipe here?
Well, I think people are going to be surprised at how long the low oil price regime hangs around. And the next event is when the glut kind of disappears or shrinks down, and the oil prices still aren't going to go up. And people are really going to be surprised and upset about it.
Yeah, I think it's just a question of how long between now and then is it going to be, and that's it's a $64 trillion question.
I know, it could be a long time.
Give me a timeline. T-Dos, final thoughts?
Yeah. I guess Steve earlier had mentioned, the funny money, the antics in central banking and the banking in general can't go on forever. That essentially someone has to call them on it. There has to be a credibility issue for the whole thing to continue. And I guess I would just caution. I'm not saying anything can go on forever, but they're all in it together at a point where it's sink or swim for everybody. This idea that like eventually what Chase is going to call out Bank of America, like the Central Bank of Europe is going to call it the Central Bank of the United States. Like who's going to call out who? Like because one goes down, they all go down. They're all part and parcel to a massive, massive con, and it really affords the people who are all in charge of it a fantastic lifestyle. They're thrilled to keep going, and I mean, who's going to call them on it? And I think the one sort of quasi-example that was given was just inadvertent calling by the general public and then just being so brutal, saying, okay, well, I just won't spend this thing because I get, and like, is that what it takes? Is that who calls them on it? Is it just basically the rank and file of humanity that has been so thoroughly kicked out of the club that it's not even calling them on it. It's just like, you didn't give me any. I couldn't possibly spend it because I didn't have it, so I just started going over and helping my pals, and we just made this whole new thing and just didn't include you. Is that who the credibility call is? Because I mean, I don't see like the Bank of Japan going like, all right, U.S. make good on some of that paper. I mean, they're all living in just as much of an illusion. So on that note, I guess I would just say that in my own personal quest, when I sit around and stare at the wall and try to think of how do we slay the beast of global industrial capitalism, what does the working man do, or the not working man? I kind of think the best thing we can do is just not expect payment from one another in our own lives, and that's sort of my personal path, is where I can just give a meal, fix somebody's car, help, just give things, give people a place to live. As I wrote in my last piece, I'm going to start giving people a place to live on my land as soon as I have my own personal legal, as soon as I can live on my land again and the legal issues are out of the way. But is that how we slay the beast? Just we always talk about barter. People are like, I'm going to get silver. I'm going to make a competing currency. Or maybe we find new communal solutions to living that don't require it. But, I guess, who was it? It was Mike Rupert who said that we change nothing until we change the way money works. And I think that's probably my favorite quote of his.
Well, you're talking basically about a gift economy, and I'm a big proponent of that myself. I think that is really the way to go. I think there's no monetary system that really does anything but benefit the few. Gail, your final thoughts?
Well, I think the direction we are going to see is that the oil prices are going to continue to head down, and they, of course, have these ups and downs, but I think the general direction is going to be down. We're going to see debt upon debt upon debt, defaults, and we're going to see derivative problems, and we're going to see bank problems. And those bank problems are going to spill over to other problems with the economy. They're probably, before they had to bail out the banks. This time it's going to be different. They're going to try to go against the depositors, or certainly the owners of the banks. So I see big financial problems coming up, and I would expect we'll be seeing them by the end of 2016. But I don't see the prices bouncing back up again. Certainly not for many, many years, but I'm afraid that this whole thing, our system is built very much like a Ponzi scheme. And for a long time, you can keep it going up if you can keep making the whole system get bigger and bigger, and you can pay more and more debt back with interest. But when you start getting squeezed and you can't pay that debt back with interest, then it starts falling down just the way a Ponzi scheme falls down when you don't have new entrants into the system to pay for the debt or whatever that you owed the earlier ones, or the returns that you owed the earlier entrants. So that's the direction I see the economy going.
Yeah, and really the economic system is a Ponzi. I think it was Bernie Madoff after 2008 when they got on top of him for his Ponzi, his little Ponzi scheme, that he said it's all a Ponzi. And in fact, that's the truth. Is really all a Ponzi. Just a much larger, more complex one. And I was thinking about it earlier and really where the Ponzi started. And the Ponzi started with the European royal families and back in the colonial era, pretty much around the mid-1600s or so, the founding of the Bank of England and whatnot. And it's been a credit cycle that has been constantly expanding. It first expanded through the expansion into the New World, and then the discovery of oil and the applications of oil in the 1800s, going into the 1900s, 20th century. That's really, the whole system's been expanding like a Ponzi since then, and now the resource base isn't there to do it anymore, and the space on the planet to exploit and isn't there anymore for people. So the system has to contract, and whatever you do with the money, it doesn't matter, because you can print money, you can't print resources, and so the money just becomes less and less valuable, and to the point where it has no value. And how long that goes, well, I'm saying I'll put a figure on it. I'll put 2020 to 2025 for pretty much complete failure of the system. But in the meantime, we still have time to watch it go down, right? And we will be watching it here on the Collapse Cafe and talking about it more as more effects occur over time. And I'm glad to have all you listeners and viewers out there. Thanks for stopping by and listening to us chat these topics up, and visit all our blogs and tell us your thoughts too, especially on the diner. We could use some new blood talking on the diner forum, so come and join us there too. And that's all to do this time until next time here on the Collapse Cafe. Later, diners.